The doorbell rang at 8:17 p.m. on a Friday night. Mark Wilson stood frozen in his kitchen, a half-washed dinner plate dripping in his hands, his son's laughter from the living room suddenly feeling distant. Through the peephole, he saw her, Catherine Reeves, CEO of Meridian Technologies and his direct supervisor for the past 3 years, standing on his doorstep in the rain. In her hands was a folder he recognized immediately, the promotion paperwork he'd declined for the 3rd time that month. What he didn't know then was that this unexpected visit would expose the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his life and forever change the relationship between a man who couldn't see what was right in front of him and a woman who refused to give up. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more emotional and inspiring content that explores the complexities of life, love, and second chances. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that touch hearts and remind us of our shared humanity. Mark had been running on autopilot since losing his wife Claire to cancer 4 years ago. At 38, he had mastered the art of functional survival, excelling at his job as a software development manager while raising his 9-year-old son Ethan with meticulous care. Their routine was sacred: breakfast at 7:15, school drop-off by 8 o'clock, work until 5 o'clock sharp, dinner by 6:30, homework help, then bedtime stories. Weekends were for Ethan's soccer games, grocery shopping, and house maintenance. There was comfort in the predictability, safety in the boundaries he'd established. What Mark failed to notice were the concerned glances from colleagues when he declined team happy hours, the gentle suggestions from Ethan's teacher about joining the PDA, and most significantly, Catherine's increasingly personal invitations to discuss his career trajectory over coffee. Each hint at connection bounced off the invisible shield he'd constructed around his heart. Catherine Reeves had noticed Mark from his first day at Meridian. His brilliant mind and quiet dedication had quickly earned him respect throughout the company. But it was the rare glimpses of the man beneath the professional facade that had captured her attention, the way his eyes softened when speaking about his son, the unexpected dry humor that emerged during stressful project deadlines, the faded wedding photo he kept facing away from colleagues on his desk. At 42, Catherine had built her career with the same intensity Mark devoted to single parenthood. As CEO, she'd transformed Meridian from a struggling startup to an industry leader in just 5 years. Her reputation for being tough but fair had earned her respect, but few people saw beyond her polished exterior to the woman who volunteered at animal shelters on Sundays and kept a collection of vintage vinyl records in her modern downtown apartment. "Mr. Wilson," Catherine said when Mark finally opened the door, raindrops glistening in her dark hair. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about why you're so determined to sabotage your career." Mark's instinct was to close the door, to protect the sanctuary he'd created for himself and Ethan. Instead, he found himself stepping aside. "Ethan," he called, his voice steadier than he felt, "can you play in your room for a bit? I need to speak with Ms. Reeves from work." Ethan appeared in the hallway, curious eyes taking in the unexpected visitor. "Is Dad in trouble?" he asked with the directness only children can manage. Catherine smiled, crouching slightly to meet his gaze. "Not at all. Your dad is actually one of our most valuable employees. That's why I'm here." After Ethan reluctantly retreated upstairs, Mark led Catherine to the kitchen, awkwardly clearing breakfast cereal boxes from the table. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm comfortable with my current position," he began, the practiced response ready on his lips. Catherine placed the folder on the table between them. "Mark, you've turned down 3 promotions in 2 years. You work remotely every Thursday without explanation. You've declined every leadership conference and networking event since you joined the company. As your boss, I need to understand if there's a problem with Meridian. As someone who," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "respects you, I want to know if there's something more going on." The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows of the modest suburban home that had once been filled with Claire's laughter. Thursdays were her treatment days, Mark finally said, his voice barely audible. "I took Claire to chemotherapy every Thursday for 18 months. Now I use that day to catch up on Ethan's appointments, or sometimes just to be available if he needs to talk. The school counselor says anniversary dates can be triggers, even for kids. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. And the promotions? Would mean travel. Longer hours. Less predictability for Ethan. Mark ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of how defensive he sounded. He's already lost his mother. I can't risk being less present in his life. Catherine nodded slowly, then surprised him by closing the folder. I understand protecting your son. What I don't understand is why you think growth and family have to be mutually exclusive. Before Mark could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. Dad, I can't find my science project materials. You promised we'd finish it this weekend. Ethan stood clutching a half-completed model of the solar system, Jupiter dangling precariously from a bent wire. Mark felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the panic of potentially disappointing his son colliding with the embarrassment of having his boss witness the chaos of his personal life. But before he could respond, Catherine spoke. You know, I used to work at the planetarium during college, she said casually. Solar system models were my specialty. Ethan's eyes widened. Really? Dad's having trouble with the rings around Saturn. He says they keep falling off. That's because your dad is a software genius, not a planetary architect, Catherine said with a smile that transformed her face. The trick is fishing line, not wire. Much more stable for orbital representations. Mark watched in astonishment as his CEO and his son launched into an animated discussion about planetary alignment and the proper ratio of styrofoam ball sizes. The scene was so unexpected, so outside the careful compartmentalization of his life, that he felt momentarily disoriented. That night marked the beginning of a slow but profound transformation. Catherine didn't push the promotion again that evening. Instead, she helped Ethan complete his science project, sharing dinner with them, Mark slightly overcooked lasagna that she praised anyway, and revealing a side of herself that few at Meridian ever witnessed. As weeks passed, Catherine began appearing in their lives with increasing frequency. First, it was legitimate work discussions that somehow extended into personal territory. Then came her appearance at Ethan's soccer game, claiming she happened to be in the neighborhood. Soon, she was bringing takeout on late work nights and introducing Ethan to her rescue dog, a three-legged Labrador named Einstein who quickly became the boy's favorite visitor. Mark found himself both drawn to and terrified by the changes Catherine's presence brought to their carefully structured lives. For the first time in 4 years, he was forced to confront the walls he'd built, not just around his career ambitions, but around his heart. The turning point came 3 months after Catherine's first visit, during a company retreat that Mark had initially refused to attend. Catherine had arranged for Ethan to join them, setting up a special program for employees' children that coincided with the professional development sessions. Watching his son flourish in this new environment, making friends with other children while he reconnected with colleagues, Mark felt something shift inside him. You know, Catherine said, joining him on a bench overlooking the retreat center's lake, when my father died, my mother was so afraid of more pain that she stopped living. She thought she was protecting herself, and me, but all she did was teach me that love wasn't worth the risk. Mark turned to look at her, struck by the vulnerability in her usually confident expression. It took me years to unlearn that lesson, she continued. To realize that walls don't just keep pain out, they keep life out too. I'm not hiding from life, Mark protested weakly. Everything I do is for Ethan. Catherine's gaze was gentle but unflinching. Is it? Or is some of it for the Mark who's afraid to admit he might still have needs of his own? The question hung between them, unanswered but impossible to ignore. That evening, during the retreat's casual dinner, Mark watched as Catherine laughed with a group of developers, her professional reserve completely absent. Ethan sat nearby with the other children, animatedly describing his science project to an impressed audience. For the first time, Mark allowed himself to see the possibility of a life that wasn't defined solely by loss and responsibility, a life where joy might exist alongside grief, where growth didn't mean betrayal of Claire's memory. The next morning, Mark knocked on Catherine's office door at the retreat center. "I'd like to discuss that promotion," he said quietly. "But with some conditions about travel and flexibility." Catherine's smile was worth the terror he felt at taking this step. "I think we can work something out." Over the following months, Mark gradually allowed the boundaries between his personal and professional lives to soften. He accepted the promotion with modified terms that respected his priorities as a father. He joined the parent committee at Ethan's school. Most significantly, he began to recognize the growing feelings between himself and Catherine, feelings that both exhilarated and terrified him. Their first official date happened almost by accident, after a late meeting when Ethan was at a sleepover. Their conversation over dinner flowed effortlessly from work projects to favorite books to childhood memories. For the first time in years, Mark felt fully seen, not just as a father or an employee, but as a complete person with desires and dreams of his own. "I never expected this," he admitted as they walked through the city park afterward, streetlights illuminating the path. "After Claire died, I thought that part of my life was over." Catherine took his hand, her touch both gentle and certain. "Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." The path forward wasn't without obstacles. Ethan initially struggled with the changing dynamic, fearful that his mother was being replaced. Mark's in-laws expressed concern about Catherine's role in their grandson's life. And Mark himself battled waves of guilt that sometimes threatened to overwhelm his newfound happiness. The most difficult moment came on the anniversary of Claire's death, when Mark found himself unable to get out of bed, crushed by a renewed sense of loss that felt like a betrayal of his growing feelings for Catherine. It was Ethan who surprised him, coming into his room with a photo album and climbing onto the bed beside him. "Mom would like Catherine," Ethan said with the simple wisdom of children. "She always said you needed someone to make you laugh more." Mark pulled his son close, tears flowing freely. "When did you get so smart?" Ethan shrugged. "Catherine says I take after you. But I think maybe I'm like Mom too." That evening, when Catherine arrived with dinner, respecting the significance of the day but refusing to leave them alone with their grief, Mark realized that love wasn't a finite resource. His heart hadn't replaced Claire with Catherine, it had simply expanded to make room for a different kind of love. 1 year after Catherine's unexpected appearance on his doorstep, Mark stood in his backyard watching as she taught Ethan how to properly throw a frisbee for Einstein. The promotion she'd once pushed had led to a new department under his leadership, one that developed accessibility software for children with learning disabilities, work that energized rather than drained him. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had expected but both now cherished. "You know," Catherine said that night after Ethan had gone to bed, "most CEOs don't end up dating their employees." Mark smiled, pulling her closer on the porch swing that had once been Claire's favorite spot. "Most employees don't slam the door in their CEO's face the first time she shows up unannounced." "You didn't slam it," Catherine corrected. "You just looked like you wanted to." "I'm glad I didn't," Mark said softly, the admission encompassing far more than that rainy night. Catherine rested her head against his shoulder. "So am I." As they sat together in comfortable silence, Mark reflected on the journey of the past year. He had learned that moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past. That protecting his son didn't require sacrificing his own happiness. That the walls he'd built to keep pain out had also been keeping love at bay. Most importantly, he'd learned that sometimes the things we most desperately try to avoid are exactly what we need to heal. 6 months later, when Mark finally found the courage to propose, it wasn't with grand gestures or elaborate plans. It was on a Thursday, what had once been his sacred day of grief now transformed into something new. Catherine said yes without hesitation, and Ethan celebrated by announcing he'd already been practicing his best man speech. That night, as Mark lay awake beside Catherine, he thought about all the hints he'd ignored, all the opportunities for connection he'd dismissed in his determination to protect himself from further loss. How different his life might be if Catherine hadn't been persistent enough to show up at his door that rainy evening and brave enough to see past his defenses to the man struggling beneath. Sometimes, he realized, the most profound changes in our lives begin with a simple knock on the door, and the courage to answer it. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of resilience, second chances, and the unexpected ways love finds us even when we're not looking. Remember, sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves are the very things preventing us from experiencing the healing and joy we deserve. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.